Welcome to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Miley, an IFS-informed certified trauma recovery coach. This show features interviews from survivors all over the world as they share their impactful story of thriving in their post-traumatic growth. We explore resources, tools, and coping skills to support the trauma survivor community. Enjoy. Hello. Before we get started on today's amazing next episode, I just wanted to let you guys know that on April 17th, I'm going to be hosting a workshop about autonomic nervous system dysregulation, what that looks like for a trauma survivor, right? So we're going to talk some neuroscience. We're going to explain what happens in the brain, in the nervous system, and in the body when you are in fight, flight, freeze, when you are in chronic or complex trauma, when you have ongoing situations that keep your body in this high stress, what that actually does to the inside of your system, how that stops your nervous system from functioning properly. And I'm so excited to bring this workshop. Guys, it's only $15 per person. I'm going to be running it April 17th in the evening, Eastern Standard Time. There's going to be a link below in the show notes, and I would love to see you there. Not only are we going to talk about dysregulation, but we're definitely going to talk about tips, tricks, and techniques to retrain your nervous system, to regulate when you get dysregulated, and how to stay in a more regulated window on a regular basis. So I look forward to seeing you. Now on to this week's episode. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Miley. I'm an IFS-informed trauma recovery coach, and I have with us today Cindy Benezra. Thank you so much for being here. So behind this accomplished author, speaker, philanthropist, and advocate, Cindy Benezra is a sexual abuse victim that is passionate now about bringing awareness to the impact of sexual trauma through meaningful conversations and system-changing discussions. Known for her strength and compassion, she bravely faces the sensitive topic with courage and resilience. She has a deep and personal understanding of how sexual abuse affects every aspect of a person's life, and she genuinely cares for those who have walked this similar path. She speaks to the many different avenues for trauma healing since she has put in the years of therapy and uncovered countless self-help techniques. Her charge is to break the chains of trauma while also breaking the cycle that it can create. Her hope is to reveal the truth as well as the path to forgiveness, healing, and freedom. Cindy, thank you so much for joining us here today to really dive deep into this very important topic. Tell us a little bit more about your journey, how you got from there to here today.
Sure, Sarah. Thank you for having me. I really love what you're doing. I love your messaging, and I think it's so vital for us, especially trauma survivors, to have a safe place to go and gain resources and feel united with a community that relates and gets them. So thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're so welcome. It's lovely to have you.
Well, and so my story is um, my father's my abuser, and I'm going to just do this in Reader's Digest version because there's so much we have to cover. My father's my abuser, and from 5 to 10, he sexually abused me. And his main form of sexual abuse was pornography. So he would wake me up in the middle of the night and take pictures of me. Was a lot of fondling. Let's see here. My mother tried to leave at different times. I did tell my mother it was going on, but it was my word against his word. And since my hymen was intact, I was put right back into the household. I had bruises, but I didn't have broken bones. And this was during the 70s when they didn't have shelters, like real true shelters for women. They had, they were shelters, but it wasn't, they didn't even have a sexual assault kit at that time. So this was back in the day, but sometimes when I listen to people's story, it's a new time, but it hasn't really evolved so much. I mean, there really isn't. Sometimes it's their word against your word. Not a whole lot of changes. And if you look historically, since biblical times, not a whole lot has changed, which is incredibly sad. It's 1 out of 4 girls, 1 out of 6 boys, and those are reported cases. So those are the ones who had enough. Can't even imagine. I never got there. I can't imagine what it would take, especially as a child, to step out and say something and then have the feeling of being alienated by your family members and turning back because they don't want to stir the pot. So I think about those people out there, those brave souls who actually went to the authorities and said, hey, so and so's touching me, or whatever what they're saying. I just think about that all the time. And because of this, I am doing this so that I could hope to break the stigma and find other communities of people, and because it happens to so many people. So it's not really anybody in particular. It's just you have to be human to experience this. And we hide it, and there's so much shame that's wrapped around it. But things need to change. They really need to change. And I think change happens through discussions. When we have discussions, then it becomes more commonplace, and we can break the stigma on that.
Yes, exactly. And that is the one of the three parts of the mission of this podcast, is really diminishing those stigmas by people telling their stories. Hey, I'm a survivor. And it's like, oh, she is. Wow, he is. Whoa, right. And it's like, yeah, breaking down those walls and those barriers. So let's dig into that, because we know that sexual trauma, sexual assault has an even deeper, a shameful stigma and intrapersonal kind of effect on the survivor, different from other types of trauma. Why is that, and what can we be doing to kind of break down some of that shame for survivors to feel like they can branch out and talk about this?
Well, I find it interesting that a lot of times there's a process to where these we don't usually get help until later on, unfortunately. And I think it's just part of the cycle. What happens is you're held captive by shame, by fear that the your offender is going to hurt you. I remember my dad telling me, if you tell somebody, this was my mom's greatest fear, was to be homeless. He
Mm,
said, your dad will be a jailbird, because it was what that's what we called somebody it was incarcerated, a jailbird, and you couldn't live with the shame of that. And he said, your mom will not have a roof over her head. And you know how much this house means to your mom. And I do know how much. And that's what kept me silent. And he also said, if you do tell, I will actually harm you. And he was a very violent, narcissistic man, very dominating. And so where there was a lot of physical abuse, where I was terrified that I probably wouldn't make it until I was terrified that I was never going to make it to grade school or at a grade school. I just never thought. I was just terrified. I'd run away a lot of times, or
mm,
pretend that I had some place to go. And I remember after my dad would abuse me, and I would get away. I would run. We happened to live in rural Arizona. And I remember running away, and my sanctuary was the orchards, because we lived, out in the boonies. And I would run, and then I would finally get to a place, it was in the orange orchards. And I'd finally get to a place, and I didn't have a role model. So
mm,
my place, my sanctuary, were the trees. And in that, I could watch the roots of those orange trees um, soaking in the mud, and they would go through droughts. They were resilient. They bared beautiful fruit. The orange blossom smelled good. The sky was out there, and I could scream as loud as I can. I could kick, I could hit the trees, and those trees didn't hit me back.
mm,
They stood right there. So in some ways, I have to say I learned a lot just in that process,
yeah.
because when you have nothing, no resources, no one to believe, who, everything you're saying, your existence is a lie, that becomes a betrayal on so many levels.
Mm,
And I think this truly, from this 5 to 10, affected my whole life. And now I'm 60. And so it's interesting. I could talk from a perspective of growing up as a child, what it was like, and the experiences that I went. I also dissociated. So I completely forgot what had happened to me as a kid. And until I became sexually active at 16, I started to have flashbacks, and these flashbacks materialized, and they were just like night sweats, and they were all in fragments. And within those fragments, I started to journal every dream that I had because they were just haunting. I just wanted them out on paper. It was like a dump that I could just take this all out of my head. And before you know it, it felt like, for me, it was like a visualization of a mirror or a broken window the where you're putting every shard of glass back in there. And when I looked through my journal, I could say, oh yes, this was me. This
Mm.
really happened to me. And I felt betrayed, raging angry. Wow, the disgust of myself. I felt that I lived a lie. I had no idea what my reality was. And I fell into an incredible deep depression, and I contemplated suicide because it wasn't that I just wanted the pain to stop. And I had no other choice. I just wanted the pain to stop. And I already had talked to other people. I talked to my mom, I talked to teachers, but it was just nobody was there. So that's why I always would look back at those trees who stood up for me during the time of this angry time. And part of this process was interesting. I was able to recreate myself because we lived in, my dad and mom decided to move to Iran. And I found it fascinating. I didn't understand what was happening to me, but I found it fascinating. All these memories came up. But before I got to this point where my memories came back, um, I was able to move after 10. I moved to Iran, and there was a different country, different language, different food. And I believe that my mind just shut down just to protect me. And I forgot about my father. I just knew I didn't like him. He was a violent man. I never would have befriended him. I just never thought he was somebody I would enjoy talking to. So I didn't. I just would kind of make space for him. And I thought, well, not everybody likes their parents. This is what I was given. This was the card of decks that this is the cards I was given, but I don't like these cards. But I have no choice. I'm 10 years old and I have to live with my cards. So um through this process of moving to different countries, I was able to recreate myself, completely recreate myself. And until I turned 16, when I was becoming sexually interested, I was able to let go, I guess you could say. And that's why I think my body, my brain, everything was just allowed me the space to absorb what had happened to me in childhood.
Wow. What does that feel like to absorb? That's such an interesting word. In a digestive kind of way, finishing processing it, allowing it to complete its process in you. What did that feel like?
Mm. Like a death, I think.
Mm,
All encompassing death. It was sort of like it felt like rot in my body.
mm,
And I didn't know why. What were the things that were preventing me from doing things? I had all these quirks, these fears, these funny things, and I just thought they were Cindyisms. And I thought the association was Spacey Cindy. They would call me that, but I didn't realize like how many. Oh, and I also had dyscalculia, and I was dyslexic. But then later on, I found out because everything that happened in those pivotal years of learning that I could not do math to save my life. I could not write to save my life, but it was all in those elemental years. And so I just relied on Webster's dictionary, a calculator. I just thought, well, okay, that's not my talent. But I thought it was a Cindyism and a quirk or a deficiency. And so when you recognize that this is your life and this is the reason why it's so hard to go through, it felt like it was death in my body because then you really realize I guess that was the moment where I thought, I need to get this out. Like whatever it is, whatever this process is, I need to get this demon, these cells, this air, and I could not even define it as a kid. And that was my journey into healing. And so wrote this book about my experience, and then from there, what it was like to go through my teen years, and then from there, what it was like to be a young adult and trying to find healthy relationships with all these obstacles. And then from there, motherhood. And it's interesting, a lot of times we get triggered from survivors get triggered from watching our own children get being raised, and we reflect back on like, hey, what happened to me at this age? And I hear it over and over again, how many moms find or discover that this had happened to them, sexual abuse had happened. But it's not only mothers. It's interesting. I talk to more men than I do women, and it's completely random places where somebody will come up and say, hey, because I'm an event planner,
Yeah.
and they'll come in public, and it's usually a guy, and they'll say, hey, I love what you're doing, Cindy. That happened to me. And I'm always like, oh my gosh, would you be able to talk about it? They're always like, absolutely not. It
Right.
changed my sexuality. My wife has no idea. Um, it's changed my life, and I could never talk about it, but I love what you're doing. I watch what I listen to you. But those were the affirmations that I was on the right path, because this is such a true, passionate
Yeah.
um, journey I'm on. And
Mhm.
then from there, it was interesting to go through the stages. And I'm about to be a grandma now. So I think it's
Mhm.
interesting to go through a relationship and all my challenges, and having a partner and going through my triggers, and really digging into that with a partner.
Wow.
It's a challenge. And I think am I healed? No. Perfectly? No. And I don't anticipate that to be. I consider myself where I have no scars. Absolutely, I have scars. But I think a lot of people have scars, and you don't have to go through sexual abuse. I think we all have, we suffer from traumatic events, and we're not immune to tears. Tears happen, and trauma happens, and it could be monumental, or it could be something very slight,
Mhm.
and it still is trauma, and it still gets processed or unprocessed, stuck, or freed up. It doesn't matter. I think it's just all relative.
Yeah. I want to ask you in a minute more about your book Under the Orange Blossoms that's out now, but I want to just touch on that before we get there about what you were just saying about the men, right? It's not always important for everyone to get on a big platform or to write a book and tell their whole story, right? But I think it is important for the processing of the trauma to work its way through, even if that's in the privacy of a therapist or a coach or, a loved one, or like you said, like partner, or inside of a relationship that feels safe, basically. But we still see many men and women who are suffering with this being like their secret. Like they can't tell anyone. They don't even want to talk about it for themselves. So if they're in that place of fear and fear's got them kind of trapped, what would be some advice to them to start making a couple of those steps, at least toward healing, to find a place where they can start to release this and process this through their body?
I think if you were young, so like say a teenager, I would start with maybe your best friend, someone that you trust, and I would share a little bit and weigh that out to see if it feels safe.
Mhm.
And if it doesn't feel safe, then try somebody else. I think that's when you start to go back to a primal instinct of using your gut intuition, like, okay, this doesn't feel safe. But I also believe as you get older too, I think people are a little bit more seasoned, or perhaps not as judgmental. I think they just know that a lot can happen to you. And I think when you're younger, you want to have the perfect family. You want to be the perfect person. And as you get older, you recognize that there isn't anything perfect. Everybody's flawed. Everybody has skeletons, but you truly don't believe that when you're younger. So I think, it's not completely off, but you could also go and establish traditional counseling too, if you don't feel comfortable talking to a friend, even if you're younger or older. And I started that. I remember talking to friends, but then feeling betrayed because they shared it. So I
Mhm.
felt that it was easier, and betrayal's my issue. So
Right.
I recognize that. So I felt that it was easier to go to a traditional therapist. And then when I came into this world and recognized how many different forms of therapy there are, I was blown away. And I think my favorite there's a couple really good traditional therapists that a therapy that I really liked, and that was oh my goodness, we just talked about it.
Oh, the family systems.
Family systems,
Yeah.
family. It felt like boot camp to me, and I was in my late 20s when I went through this, and it was 3 years of this. We had a family, and I would wanna act out, or like it was a script. So, for example, I would say, "Okay, I just confronted my father, and you are going to be my father, and my mother's going to be standing here, and these are my siblings, and these are my friends." And I would rewrite that script of what it was. Well, I would role play what it was like, and then I would get a chance to rewrite that script, and everybody in my group um, accommodated me through that process. It was so hard, so many tears. It felt like boot camp, and I thought that was very effective. EMDR, I thought was just amazing. I went to a trauma therapist. I couldn't believe, if you would have asked me, is that effective? I would probably laugh out of it. It is quite effective. I was shocked at the process of a little light going back and forth and going through that. It's amazing. What else did yeah, those are the two I think that were the most profound where I came out. I felt that I had gone through an exorcism.
Yeah.
And what else? I've done so many different types of alternative. I'm a Reiki practitioner too, and it just became this journey of finding empowerment,
Mm.
finding healing, taking back my power, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And I don't I look at it, am I ashamed? No. I actually think in some ways I've become a better person through
Mhm.
it.
Mm.
And it's what it is. That's
Yeah.
all it is. It's just what it is. I've become a better person. I think I understand people more. I understand myself more. And in some ways, I'm able to have healed other aspects of myself that I don't think I would have dug deep enough to get to recognize.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So you're like on this like rediscovery path. You're reconnecting and rediscovering to yourself. What does that feel like maybe for people that are listening? So you're talking about the script and the family system, but also some people are just on a regular basis trying to rewrite this narrative, rewriting old beliefs that maybe they're trauma, sexual or not, but that made them believe they're not worthy, they're not lovable, no one cares for them. They don't know how to be an adult. They don't know how to be a human. All these beliefs and things, people are able to really rewrite the entire narrative of their story. And it sounds like you've done a lot of that in your rediscovery process. Why was that so important for you? What did that feel like to go through rewriting your narrative? You're showing up now totally different as a totally different person, but like you said, better. So what is that like?
Well, I think it was just an inner desire. I think it was very aware. I was such a quiet person. Was I was never I never was able to exercise my voice or be seen. And through this process, when I looked at my notebook and how I journaled, I thought, you know what? I matter, I count, and I have something to say. And I didn't really have that belief system at all. So even though I looked at it, I didn't feel it inside. And I think because of that, that's what I thought, okay, I have to change this. It was an exhausting process. I never really shared it with others, but until I got older, actually, my daughter and I, we own an event company, and I was trying to write a cookbook and designing interior, like creating the perfect dinner party and tips on how to do this quicker. And I was going through my recipes. And as I was writing my recipes, they were all triggering me. This happened at 5, this happened at 7, this happened at 8. And they were all triggering me. And so just to dump it, I took out notebooks and I would write down, like, oh, that's an inspirational quote that got me through that year. Oh, that's a recipe. And oh, I remember what happened to me at 7. And so I started writing. I had these notebooks in front of me. And when I was all done going through my recipes, it took me an entire day. Um, I remember like one was inspirational quotes, one was positivity, inspirational quotes, mantras, that type of thing, um, tools that helped me get through that when I was younger. But I think they were so monumental because I had to come up with them myself. So I remember those the most. And then it was the great recipes and decorating tips. And then it was about my sexual abuse and the trauma that I had undergone. I have a special needs son, and it was about the grief and the pain that I held, and just the constant feeling of grief and the exercises that I had done with that. So there were several of these books, and when I ran my hand over them, it felt so, I guess you could say, cathartic. But what was still held me and captivated who I am and how it was this book on sexual abuse. And I thought I could talk about anything, but this I cannot talk about. People are uncomfortable. They don't like to talk about sex. It was such a stigma around it. So that's how I ended up going in this direction, because I feel that so many people are beholden to their past and we're stuck. And there's nothing worse than feeling trapped, imprisoned in your own body because that trauma holds you back, holds every part of you back. And so when you exercise that, I'm going back to your question here, when you exercise that, it is a complete newfound freedom. And you sometimes don't know really who you are until you find that freedom in a cellular way, that freedom, that mind space, that freedom in your voice. It is revolution. It's just unbelievable. And when you're able to release that and rewrite your script and really own who you are, sometimes I still look at myself and I go, I don't know that girl, because I was the girl who was terrified that I would never make it to my teens because I would be beaten up so bad. And when I look at that person, that scared person, um, I'm not that person anymore. I'm nowhere near that person,
Yeah.
but I am still myself. All the parts of me, I still am myself.
Mm.
I just don't hold this huge space in my head, in my body, my heart for that.
Wow. That's beautiful. That's really beautifully said. I can appreciate that. And am thankful that you can name that like that is still a part of you that lives inside of you. It's something you went through, but you're not identifying with that character anymore. You're not identifying with that emotion of fear, which is a really beautiful way to say that. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And you have done that with your book, Under the Orange Blossoms. We know why you wrote the book. We get that. Who is this book actually for? Who should be picking this up and reading this book?
Actually, anybody really. I don't, everybody says, oh, you have to have a demographic to sell a book. And I really tried to make it about a demographic. I really did. I tried to make it about someone going through their teen years, but that didn't resonate with me. I thought, oh, I'll do it with somebody who's going through relationship issues, with a checkered past, or however, whatever you want to call it. And then I thought, well, maybe I should do it about motherhood. And I mean, it was just vacillating. And I thought, no, it's humans. It's just, you have to be human. It's not about a race or a sex or anything. It's just human being human. And that's the part where we are not exempt of grief, pain, tears.
True. Yeah. Yeah. For even those people who haven't been through sexual assault or sexual abuse, it doesn't mean that they haven't been through loss and that they can't understand what fear feels like and they can't understand what shame feels like. We've all had those moments of embarrassment or questioning ourselves. And, everyone can relate to that, even if the story isn't exactly the same. So, yeah, I appreciate that. Cindy, thank you so much for being here. We like to ask all of our guests, and I know for you, family systems was such an important therapy. What were maybe one or two other resources that were so catalyst in your healing, beyond that, the family systems and the Reiki, I know, like you said, was really helpful as well?
I'm going to go back to my teen years, and this is something that I had practiced. I started finding inexpensive things. I lived in a foreign country. I couldn't go to the library. We didn't have internet. So I did what worked for me, and that was taking words that own me. Whatever these words, I wrote it down on a piece of paper in a felt pen, and I took this sheet of paper and I took it in the shower with me and I did this every single day. Like if it was stupid or if it was hate, whatever it may be. I just started writing these words. Later on, they became phrases, and I would watch the shower wash over them. And I started to do a lot of visualization work, which really, in some ways, turned out to be a lot of meditation. So I'd practice that these words were dripping off of my body so that they didn't own me because they were just words. And I would really focus on that. And visualization, it is such a powerful tool. You don't have to get fancy. I remember taking magazines and I'd rip out pictures of what does love look like? What does that look like? And it could be your version, but I remember I had pictures of what love looked like. I didn't have time to glue it on boards or anything like that. I would just rip them out and stick them in a folder. And when I was thinking like, oh, I am not loved, or I am not worthy, or I don't matter, what does that look like? And I would pull out my pieces of paper, look at it, these images, and then envision that and envision what that feels like in my body, in my soul, in my toes. And I would just try to ground myself into that. I think journaling, it sounds so meh, but there's a lot of power to journaling if that's your tool. I did not start sophisticated. I just had just single words on there, and before you know it became just a skill. And really, only it's 5 minutes of your time. Meditation, 5 minutes of your day, where you could sit and really try to just be mindful. And it's a skill. It takes some time. Exercise. When you go through trauma, I believe there's a lot of bad health habits. Our body really, truly is. Um, us, we were given these bodies, and we have to take care of our bodies. So if it's exercise, I don't like to exercise, but honestly, a walk is not that hard.
Yeah.
Or if it's just stretching or whatever it is, so that you could move your body. And I used to focus on every time I would exercise, I was releasing something in my body or doing something for myself. It was an expression of self-love and loving myself, and a picture like what it's like. I'm eating this, I don't know, this fruit instead of this cookie because I love myself. I'd actually picture love going into my body. I love this, and focus on that. Cooking, even sprinkling love into my food, and a lot of visionary work, meditation, hmm, mantras. I would come up with my own mantras, and I would, if I had, I know I would have a room full of sticky notes, and they would all be splattered in toothpaste because I have written so many sticky notes on my mirror. I would make up my own mantras. I love in all my flaws. I love myself, all my flaws. Every time I brush my teeth, every time I go to the bathroom, every time I fix a little strand of hair, I would say my mantras, and I had a lot up there. I would say it maybe 20, 50 times, but if you keep on saying that, when you're not going to believe it instantly, but when you say it, something in there, something ignites in your body, and then you start to go, okay, well, maybe I do. I used to pick one body part. I remember when I was a teenager, I liked my front teeth and my eyebrow. There was nothing else I liked about myself. So I really had to work on it. I would stand naked in front of the mirror and look for something, look at my body and go, this is a piece of art. It was really hard, but yeah, I would do that.
Wow.
And they're not fancy. They're free. And it's really, I do believe intuitively, we all have this beautiful gift of healing and recognizing that we can heal. And I think we all just genuinely know. Sometimes it's not really money. It's, you don't need a gym membership. You don't need, there isn't a magic pill, unfortunately, for trauma, racing trauma. There
Yeah.
isn't. Uh, it's
Yeah.
work. Mhm.
Powerful, powerful tools. And like you said, all those ones that you just listed, or most of those, are inside of your head, kind of visualization work, and it's free. These are all free resources that are available to you to kind of let things wash over you, wash through you, move out of you, be, reaffirming yourself. Those are great. I'm going to have all those linked up in the show notes, as well as where people can find you. So please just tell us where you are on the socials, what your website is, and I'll have that all linked down below so people can reach out. And I'll also have the book linked up as well.
Thank you. So I'm at www.cindytalks.com. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, and you could buy my book on Amazon. That's probably the easiest. So
I love that. Cindy, Benezra, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your story, talking with us today, and sharing all these beautiful tools. And I look forward to chatting with you again another time. This has been lovely. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
thank you, hon. You too.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to or watching this episode of the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and follow. For any information that was discussed in this podcast episode, check out the show notes below. Until next time, be well.